there is something that almost no one notices. Something hidden right before the eyes of the world. An ancient truth, recorded in the scriptures, but distorted, forgotten, and even forbidden to be questioned. And the most surprising thing, this truth concerns the identity of a people who changed history and who continue to influence everything that is happening now. You need to hear this, because when this revelation enters your spirit, everything will make sense. There is a confusion spread throughout humanity that is not only historical, it is spiritual, a confusion built up over the centuries, influencing wars, beliefs, political decisions, and even the way people interpret the Bible. Few have the courage to talk about it. Few dare to expose this truth, because it shakes the foundations of faith, history, and the identity of entire nations. Today, we are going to reveal something that many avoid, an understanding that separates myths from facts, tradition from scripture, names from purpose. You're going to discover why Jews, Hebrews, and Israelites are not the same thing, and why this distinction completely changes how you read the Bible and understand God's plan. And if this video has reached you, it's no coincidence. Something inside you has been drawn to this revelation. God is about to open your eyes, and nothing you hear today will be ordinary. First of all, you need to understand one thing. The Bible is not the story of a single people with a single name, but a collection of interwoven stories, revealing characters, purposes, and covenants that unfold throughout the centuries. When we try to simplify everything into a single group, we end up erasing essential nuances of divine revelation. There are different lineages, each with a specific mission within God's plan. There are distinct moments, marked by promises and judgments, that shaped the spiritual identity of each descendant. And when all these layers are mixed together without understanding, the truth is slowly lost. The word Hebrew did not begin as a religious term, and this is something that many do not realize. Before becoming a cultural identity, it was a mark of movement, courage, and transition. Hebrew comes from ivory, which literally means someone who crosses physical, emotional, and spiritual boundaries. Abraham was called this because he left behind everything he knew: his land, his culture, his logic, and even his sense of security to follow the voice of the living God. The term represented a journey, not an institution. It is extremely important to understand that every Hebrew comes from this lineage of crossing. But not every Hebrew is Jewish. The Hebrew lineage begins with Abraham, continues to Isaac, and then to Jacob. Even before any reference to the term Jew exists, when Jacob receives the new name Israel from God, a new identity emerges, marking the birth of a nation. Only much later, as history progresses and kingdoms divide, will the term Jew arise. These are three different words, with three distinct histories and three distinct purposes. The Israelites are those who descend from the 12 tribes, formed by the sons of Jacob. It is important to imagine that Israel was not an ordinary person, but a patriarch marked by a profound spiritual transformation. Judah, one of these 12 tribes, was only a part of the whole, a piece within a much larger structure. However, over time, many began to identify all descendants of Israel as Jews, which creates historical and spiritual confusion. The truth is that Israelite is not synonymous with Jew, and understanding this is key to understanding the Bible correctly. The term Jew arises with the tribe of Judah and with the kingdom that was established in the south, after the division of Israel. When the kingdom was divided, the north became known as Israel and the south as Judah. Because of the political and territorial strength of the tribe of Judah, the inhabitants of that region became known as Jews. This means that Jew is not only a spiritual identity, but also a political and territorial one, marked by historical events that occurred centuries after Abraham. One of the most revealing keys to this study is understanding that the Hebrews are the origin, the Israelites form the nation, and the Jews constitute a specific tribe. This understanding brings clarity and reorganizes everything that previously seemed confusing. When you understand this distinction, you realize how God works in a precise, orderly, and intentional way. The scriptures cease to seem contradictory, and the timeline of biblical history becomes coherent. Everything fits together with a perfection that only God himself could orchestrate. Jesus, being born into the lineage of David, was Jewish, but he also fulfilled other identities that connected him to God's eternal plan. He was an Israelite, belonging to the nation formed by the 12 tribes. He was a direct descendant of Abraham, and therefore a Hebrew. He carried within himself the three identities: origin, nation, and tribe. This shows that Jesus was at the center of all the promises and prophecies, fulfilling every detail that pointed to the promised Messiah. Not all Israelites remain Jewish, and this is a part of the story that many ignore. The 10 tribes that made up the northern kingdom were scattered throughout the world after the Assyrian invasion. They mixed among the nations, adopted different customs, and lost much of their identity. However, despite this dispersion, they did not disappear from spiritual history. God had promised that he would bring them all back in due time, and that promise continues to resonate to this day. The part that few people talk about, perhaps out of ignorance, perhaps out of fear of controversy, is that today, when the world uses the term Jew, it refers to only a fraction of the original promise, because Judah survived the dispersion and preserved its records, its faith, and its culture. It was natural that the name Jew became the most well-known. However, this does not mean that the other tribes ceased to exist or that they ceased to be part of God's covenant with Israel. This matters deeply because God works with identity. He does nothing by chance. He acts through specific names, lineages, purposes, and covenants. When someone mixes these identities, they also confuse the prophetic understanding of the Bible. That is why many read the scriptures and cannot understand certain events that are unfolding in the world today. Without distinguishing these identities, prophecy seems like an incomplete puzzle. The promise made to Abraham was not limited to a single isolated group in the world, but encompassed a multitude of nations. God did not call Abraham to be the father of a small people, but to become the root of something great. Hebrew represents that root. Israel represents the national calling. Judah represents a fundamental part, but not the entire promise. Each layer carries a role within divine revelation, and each one points to the future of humanity in God's plan. Many people confuse appearance with identity and end up wrongly judging spiritual matters by what the eyes see. But God never worked that way. He did not choose Abraham because he stood out physically, but because his heart was willing to obey. The identity that God establishes goes beyond cultural, physical, or ethnic characteristics. It is based on covenant, purpose, and faithfulness. And this completely changes how we interpret the biblical narrative. The Hebrews carried the calling of the crossing, a spiritual symbol of leaving the ordinary to enter the extraordinary. They were the ones who moved when God called, crossing borders and dismantling established patterns. The Hebrews' crossing is not just geographical, it is emotional, spiritual, and existential. She represents the decision to abandon the old to live God's new life, and this has become a landmark in the identity of this people. The Israelites, in turn, carry the weight of a national promise. They represent the manifestation of the covenant that God established with Jacob. The promise of the land is part of this covenant, as is the promise of return and complete restoration. Israelite identity is deeply linked to the territory, heritage, and continuity of the family lineage that God set apart for himself. It is an identity marked by the land and the collective purpose. Jews, on the other hand, bear the responsibility of preserving the faith, the Torah, and the messianic lineage throughout the centuries. Even though it was only one of the 12 tribes, Judah played a crucial role in maintaining the symbols, rituals, and traditions that kept alive the expectation of the Messiah's coming. This zeal allowed the faith to survive intact, even in the face of persecution, exile, and dispersion, keeping the thread of history alive until the arrival of Jesus. But here is something truly shocking. At various points in the Bible, Jews and Israelites appear on opposite sides of historical and spiritual conflicts. This is because, despite sharing a common root, they do not represent the same identity structure. Jews represent a tribe responsible for preserving the faith and the messianic lineage. Israelites represent the totality of the 12 tribes scattered across the earth. Mixing these two identities erases nuances that explain many biblical conflicts. When the scriptures mention the faithful remnant, they are not referring only to the tribe of Judah, as many believe. This remnant is made up of descendants from all tribes, all lineages, and all peoples who remained faithful to God's covenant. The concept of remnant is spiritual, not geopolitical. It transcends borders and genealogies, reaching those whose hearts have not been corrupted. Therefore, Reducing it to a single group is to miss the essence of the promise. The prophetic return of the end times is not just about Jews returning to their land. It is about Israel being completely restored. All tribes, all scattered descendants, all spiritual heirs of the promise will be gathered. This restoration is much greater than we understand historically. It involves spiritual movements, global awakenings, and a divine calling that is happening now. The promise is of fullness, not fragmentation. And perhaps, just perhaps, you are hearing this now because you are part of this restoration greater than history records. It may be that your heart has been awakened because there is something in your spiritual lineage that resonates with this truth. There is a calling happening in the world, a silent awakening that connects people from different nations. And when a truth like this comes to you, it's not a coincidence. It's a divine calling. When God reveals identity, He reveals destiny. He does this in an orderly, patient, and profound way, aligning everything that seemed disconnected. Perhaps this video is the beginning of a greater understanding for your life, something that will open your eyes to purposes that were dormant. When you discover who you are in God's plan, everything makes sense. Your battles, your pains, your callings, and even the people who crossed your path. None of this was by chance. The understanding between Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews is not only historical, but profoundly spiritual. Each identity carries a specific revelation and purpose within God's plan. When everything gets mixed up, the enemy takes advantage of the confusion to erase essential biblical truths. But when everything is put in its place, the light shines. And when the light shines, understanding and liberation begin to happen. Hebrews represent those who overcome the impossible through faith. And this is not just an ethnic characteristic, but a spiritual one. God has always called people willing to cross borders, from fear to faith, from doubt to trust, from comfort to purpose. To be Hebrew is to be someone who accepts God's call to leave the old behind. It is to carry a mark of movement, courage, and surrender. It is the identity of the crossing that transforms destinies. Israelites represent a collective promise, marked by the unity of a nation set apart by God. They carry the responsibility of preserving not only a faith, but an entire history of promises made by the Creator Himself. Israel is a symbol of covenant, heritage, and prophetic destiny. It represents the continuity of the promise made to Abraham that has spanned generations. And even today, that promise remains alive, calling his descendants back. Jews, in turn, carry a unique mission: to preserve the lineage of the Messiah and guard the essence of the faith. Even being only one of the 12 tribes, they have become the best-known group because they have survived with records, traditions, and culture throughout the centuries. Their faithfulness has allowed the prophecies to be fulfilled and that the Messiah came into the world. But that doesn't mean they represent the entirety of Israel. They represent an essential part, but still a part. When these identities become confused, many biblical interpretations appear distorted. This affects the understanding of prophecies, lineages, and even the promise of the end times. Many look at the world stage and don't understand why certain things are happening. But when you separate the identities and understand each purpose, everything begins to make sense. The Bible opens before your eyes, as never before. The enemy has always tried to erase identities because identity is spiritual power. When someone doesn't know who they are, they lose direction, purpose, and strength. The same is true for entire nations and lineages. Confusing Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews is more than a historical error. It's a spiritual strategy to obscure life-transforming revelations. But when that truth is restored, clarity returns. And with clarity comes purpose. The promise made to Abraham remains alive, echoing through the centuries. God promised a multitude of nations, not just one isolated people. He promised countless descendants, an eternal inheritance, and a plan that would involve all of humanity. Hebrews carry the root of that promise. Israelites carry its national expression. Jews carry the messianic thread that culminates in Christ. Each piece is essential within God's perfect plan. When Jesus came, He carried all these identities to fulfill every part of the covenant. He was Hebrew through the lineage of Abraham. He was Israelite through the national and spiritual structure. And He was Jewish through the tribe and lineage of David. He united in Himself all the promises, all the purposes, and all the identities. The Messiah came as the perfect fulfillment of everything God had planned from the beginning. The 10 scattered tribes remain a mystery to the world, but not to God. He knows where each descendant is, even if they have lost their culture or their names. The promise of restoration does not depend on physical location, but on spiritual calling. God is awakening hearts around the world, bringing identity, memory, and purpose to people who never imagined being part of this story. He is reuniting Israel. Today, we live in times when prophecy is being fulfilled before our very eyes. The return of the Jews to the land is only one part of the great process. The restoration of the other tribes, the spiritual awakening, and the understanding of identities are part of something much bigger. God is putting it all together piece by piece, fulfilling every detail He promised, and those with spiritual eyes are beginning to realize that we are living in a unique time in history. And perhaps you are realizing something now, that many of the battles you face are not just emotional or physical but spiritual. Because when you don't understand who the chosen people are in the Bible, you also don't understand the depth of the promise God made to the world. And when this becomes confusing, the enemy tries to sow deception, division, and distraction. But when the truth is revealed, the light dispels all fog, and that is exactly what is happening to you now. Listen carefully. Nothing God does is random. He chose Abraham, formed the Hebrews, raised up the Israelites, and preserved the Jews for an eternal reason. And that reason connects, in some way, with your own history. Because understanding these 3 identities is understanding the structure of the plan of redemption. It's knowing where the promise comes from and where it's going. And that changes everything. But there's something even deeper. Something almost no one talks about. Each of these identities carries a prophecy embedded within it. The Hebrews point to faith. The Israelites point to the calling and the promise. The Jews point to preservation and return. And each phase represents something that God also does within us. Because before we are transformed, God makes us go through it. Before giving us destiny, Eranamus Hues, and before establishing us, He preserves us in the fire of trial. Have you noticed this in your life? Moments when you went through things you thought would destroy you, but somehow you came out. The other side, different. That's the Hebrew process in you. Then came the callings moments, when God marked you, touched you, awakened you. Situations where you understood, this isn't normal. God is calling me. That's the Israelite identity manifesting in your spiritual journey. And finally, then came the moments when God preserved you when no one believed you would survive. These are the Jewish moments of your spirit. The moments when God sustained you, protected you, and lifted you up when all seemed lost. Do you understand now why it's not just ancient history? It's also your story. It's also your process. This is how God forms a purpose within someone. And when you understand this, you understand why the enemy tries so hard to confuse these identities. Because if he makes you misunderstand God's plan, he makes you doubt what God is doing in you. But today that confusion falls to the ground. Today light enters where there was shadow. Now listen to this. There are people watching this video now who are living the Hebrew phase. The phase of crossing over. Going through intense struggles, changes, uncertainties. But God is using this period to lead you to the right place. Others are living the Israelite phase, the calling becoming clear, and some are already in the Jewish phase preserved for something greater. But whatever your phase, know this: God is aligning you with His purpose. He has never lost control of your story. And just as He preserved a people for thousands of years, He is also preserving you. You are not alone. You are being molded. And here is a key revelation. The 3 identities are not just historical categories. They are spiritual mirrors. When God wants to raise someone up, He first makes them cross over as a Hebrew, then calls them by name as an Israelite, and finally strengthens and preserves them as a Jew. And this explains why some storms you have lived through did not destroy you, because you were experiencing divine preservation. It explains why certain paths closed. It wasn't rejection, it was direction. It explains why some things took time. God was preparing you to cross over. And it explains why you are hearing this now. Because God wants you to understand where you are on the journey. Perhaps you've never realized it, but there's a calling upon you. Something God began long ago, in small details, in small anxieties, in doors that opened or closed. And now, He is reminding you, I have unforgotten the promise I made about your life. Just as He didn't forget the promise made to Abraham, just as He didn't let Israel disappear. And when you understand the plan, fear loses its power, because you realize that everything always had a purpose. Every pain, every weight, every change, every silence from God, everything was part of the process of transforming you, just as He transformed Abraham into the father of multitudes, just as He transformed Jacob into Israel. But there's something even greater coming, a revelation that connects the past, the present, and the future. Because understanding who the Jews, the Hebrews, and the Israelites are isn't just looking back. It's looking at the prophecy that is being fulfilled before our eyes today. And this prophecy points to a return, a restoration, and a global spiritual awakening. Something that is already happening now. And perhaps you are feeling it. A restlessness in the spirit, a calling, a perception that something big is happening in the world. This is not anxiety. This is not coincidence. It is God awakening those He is preparing, and you are one of them. Because just as God moved history to preserve a people, He is also moving your history to preserve the purpose He planted within you. Nothing you have lived has been wasted. No tear fell without reason. No closed door was a mistake. Everything was leading you to this exact moment of revelation. And now we come to something that few dare to speak of. There is a spiritual war behind the identity of God's people. An ancient war, which began long before you were born, and is still happening at this very moment. The enemy tries to distort, confuse, and attack everything God has chosen. And why? Because what God chooses, the enemy fears. That's why the Hebrews were persecuted. That's why Israel was attacked repeatedly. That's why the Jews faced centuries of hatred and destruction. Because there is a promise concerning the end where there is a promise, there is battle. And this same spiritual dynamic happens with you. The greater the purpose, the greater the attack. But see, the beauty of this, despite all the centuries of persecution, dispersion, and pain, the Jews continue to exist. Israel returned to its land after almost 2,000 years. The prophecies that seemed impossible were fulfilled before our eyes. This is divine preservation. This is God showing that His word never fails. And if God was faithful to a promise made thousands of years ago, why wouldn't He be faithful to the promise He made to you? Why wouldn't He watch over your path? Why wouldn't He sustain you in difficult times? Understand, the same God who preserved Israel is preserving your life. You are not abandoned, you are being shaped by eternity. Now think about this. The Hebrews overcame the impossible. The Israelites were marked with a new name. The Jews survived the unimaginable. And do you really think God can't do something extraordinary in your story? Do you really think what you are experiencing now is the end? No, it's just the beginning. Because when God begins to reveal the truth, darkness loses its power. And what you are hearing today is not information. It is awakening. It's as if God is opening a window within your spirit and saying, look again, I am in control. And when that awareness is born, fear no longer rules. Now understand one last difference perhaps. The most important. Hebrew describes a journey. Israelite describes a calling. Jew describes a people preserved by the covenant. These three realities do not compete with each other. They complement each other. They form the complete picture of God's plan. And within that plan, there is Christ, the Son of God, born within the Jewish lineage, fulfilling the promise made to the Israelites and offering faith to all nations as announced to the Hebrews. Jesus is the meeting point between the three identities. He is the thread that stitches together the entire spiritual narrative. He is the bridge between the promise and the fulfillment. He is the center of everything. And that is why this message matters so much, because when you understand the history of the chosen people, you understand the heart of God. And when you understand the heart of God, you understand the purpose that is being built in your life. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is coincidence. Everything is interconnected by the hand of the Lord. And perhaps you are realizing this now, like pieces of a puzzle that finally fit together. Everything you have experienced, the pains, the changes, the transitions is part of a much larger spiritual process than you imagined. You are not a product of chance. You are within a divine narrative, and God is writing something powerful about you. And that's why you are here. Because God is opening your eyes to something that many ignore. He is calling you to discern times, understand purposes, and position yourself spiritually. You are being prepared for something greater, something that will require faith, wisdom, and spiritual sensitivity. And God brought you here to begin this awakening. So take a deep breath now, and let this truth penetrate your heart. Just as God guided the Hebrews, formed Israel and preserved the Jews, He is also guiding you. He is also forming you. He is also preserving you for an eternal purpose. Nothing you experience is outside His control. Nothing you lost was outside His plans. Nothing that hurt you was forgotten by Him. He is building something. He is shaping something. He is preparing you for a breakthrough that will still surprise many people. And perhaps today is the day you understand this for the first time. The day the light enters. The day the spiritual confusion falls away. The day you realize that God is calling you to something deeper, more serious, and more real. The day you understand, I am not alone. God is leading me. Because just as God preserved His people throughout the centuries, He will preserve you through this phase as well.